good to know. Hello, everyone. I think we're just wait here for a couple seconds as people get settled. But welcome to this afternoon's session. We're really thrilled to be able to talk about something that I know everyone wants to talk about, which is funding for journalism. And we're really lucky to have an amazing panel of some of the top funders in the industry with us today. And we're excited to hear from you too. We really want this to be an open conversation. Emily and I will get it going, but we will be opening this up very quickly to questions and conversation from you all. So very briefly, my name is Megan Farnsworth. I'm the managing director at the Center for Investigative Reporting and Reveal.
And I'm Emily Ramshaw. I'm the editor of the Texas Tribune based in Austin, Texas.
And so this panel is something that I know everyone wants to talk about, which is how can we all work with these amazing organizations to fund our journalism, to be clear about the rules that go with it, how can we better understand the process. So we're gonna dive right into it and ask these guys some questions.
And obviously be thinking of your own questions because as Megan said, we're going to open this up really early. We know there will be a lot of specifics. So it's just some quick introductions running down the table here of the mostly female crowd here, although luckily we've got Tom joining us. Jennifer Choi from the McCormick Foundation, Molly de Aguiar from the Dodge Foundation, Tom Glazer from the Democracy Fund, Lauren Pabst from the MacArthur Foundation, Jennifer Preston from the Knight Foundation, and Barbara Rabb from the Ford Foundation. So as Megan said, we have an incredible group of people who many of you have probably already asked for or received funding from. So just to get us started, you know, there is so much that you as funders could be spending your money on. Set the stage for us. Why is journalism an arena that's worthy of your investment? And do you see it as an investment or do you see it as sort of sustaining support over time? So anyone who wants to kick us off, feel free to jump in. Jennifer, you want to kick us off?
Yeah. Am I sitting in the wrong spot? I should have sat all the way at the end so I could say whatever she and he said. So the Robert R. McCormick Foundation is really continuing the legacy of Robert R. McCormick. So the easy answer to that is that he was the editor and publisher of the Tribune. But our mission is to foster an engaged citizenry. So in order to be engaged and make really good decisions, you also need to be a savvy consumer of news and information.
So I work for the Dodge Foundation, which is a foundation in New Jersey. We're focused on New Jersey. And we care a lot about community. We care about making communities better in New Jersey, a better place to live, work, and play. And we see journalism as a vital pathway to improving our communities.
Hi, my name is Tom Glazer. I work at the Democracy Fund. And I'm thrilled to be on a panel. I think the first panel ever where I'm the only guy, so I'm looking forward to it. I work at the Democracy Fund, and we are the new kids on the block, so to speak, created by eBay founder Pierre Omidyar and launched as a private foundation in only 2014, although we had been making grants under another entity prior to that. Why do we fund journalism? Our interest is in a resilient democracy, a political system that's able to withstand new challenges and deliver on its promises to the American people. We're focused purely and solely on the United States. And it's those priorities that drive us to invest in the public sphere. To your question about is it investment or sustaining support, from our point of view, it is definitely investment in creating a strong political system and a resilient public sphere.
Hi, I'm Lauren Pabst. I work at the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. And public journalism, public interest media is one of the longest running areas that the MacArthur Foundation supports. We've been funding in this area since the early 80s, really when the foundation was just really getting started. And the foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, works on a variety of other issue areas as well, but our work in journalism and media in particular is situated in the belief that an independent field of journalism and journalists is an essential public good. There is a place for journalism not reliant on corporate support, not reliant on the government, as we know in the US, we don't really have a tradition of that anyway. So we really do look at it as a foundational place where a private foundation can play a role. And it is an enduring commitment of the MacArthur Foundation. So it is something that we look at over the long run.
Great. My name is Jennifer Preston. I'm with the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, and I'm new to the world of philanthropy. I just joined the Knight Foundation less than a year ago after 30 years in working in newspapers, news organizations, the last almost 20 years at the New York Times. The John S. and James L. Knight Foundation began with two brothers who owned a number of newspapers across the country. They never wanted to call them a chain. And they are among the newspapers that have produced some of the most important journalism over the last couple of decades. And those newspapers include the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Miami Herald, the San Jose Mercury News, the Akron Beacon Journal. And at the Knight Foundation, our focus is on supporting innovation that will advance the practice of journalism. So what does that mean? I can hear a copy editor of the New York Times say in my ear. So what that means is we are looking for people and projects that are committed to supporting digital transformation, that are committed to finding new ways of storytelling, new ways to find an audience so that we can strengthen journalism and support journalism. So one of the most difficult things for me to understand when I first joined Knight was why we didn't support content, like why we don't support a great idea for a story. And that's because we are really committed to supporting not just great ideas, but how we can make great ideas happen. So I'm looking for great conversation around that today.
Thanks. I'm Barbara Rabb, and I'm at the Ford Foundation. We are headquartered in New York City, but Ford is a global foundation. We work in 10 offices around the globe. And what I hope you're hearing just from this very first question is that we all come to funding journalism through, in some cases, slightly different doors, and in some cases, very different doors. And so the Ford Foundation has, for a very long time, has always been committed to the arts and creativity and free expression, and it is through that door that journalism has always been something that the Ford Foundation has supported. And Ford is, we call ourselves a social justice foundation. So the reason that we think journalism is important and free expression and creativity and all of that is that it is part of, it's a key component in the social change work that we do around the world. That telling stories, the way we tell our stories, the way other people tell our stories is critical in all of the different things that come together to move the needle on important social justice issues.
That's great, and I think that leads us to the next question, which we've asked you each to kind of prepare a slide with knowing what your priorities are and where you look for. What are some good examples out there in the journalism world that you have funded that you are especially proud of? And so we want to kind of go through that to give a little bit of sense of what's out there and what you might be up against when you are applying for these guys. So we have the McCormick up first.
So this is kind of our dirty little secret in the sense that we haven't formally made a grant to the City Bureau, which is a project that we've been working on essentially to figure out how we could really strengthen the local journalism sector. So we wanted to do this in Chicago, which is a very diverse and competitive market. How are we going to get into new audiences? How are we really going to amplify community credibility? Well, we did a lot of on-the-ground research, figured out who the movers and shakers were on all different levels of news organizations, for-profit, nonprofit, community-based organizations, and we did what every news person loves, is we did a happy hour at our foundation I think we paid $100 in Chex Mix, beer and wine, and we got all these guys together and said, look, why don't you guys come up with a collaborative, an idea where you could incubate really interesting partnerships. And you need to be bridgers, you need to be able to get buy-in from different communities, and you also need to be tied to your institutions as well. We don't want you to quit your day jobs because we want to call your bosses and say, this is really important work. So that's a city bureau. One of the projects that they're tied to is the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern's Social Justice News Nexus. There's a lot of letters, and I'm not always sure what they mean. But the Medill project is a community journalism project using grad students, faculty advisors, and community journalist fellows to really cover issues that affect Chicago's most underserved communities.
Next one.
So I answered this slightly differently. I didn't pick one example. I just wanted to give a brief overview of how we fund at Dodge because we're focused on New Jersey, hence the map. New Jersey is kind of a funny media landscape because we are overshadowed by being sandwiched between the New York and Philadelphia media markets. So if you live in New Jersey and you turn on your TV, you generally get New York and Philadelphia news. There's really very little local news there. And about 5 years ago, the governor basically sold off the public media licenses to New York and Philadelphia, which is when we stepped in and decided to start funding journalism in New Jersey. And our approach was not to just try to fill the gaps because there are way too many gaps and we didn't have enough money for that. So our approach was to develop what we called the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University. And its role is as a central hub of support for the whole ecosystem in New Jersey. They offer peer-to-peer networking, they offer training opportunities, they facilitate collaboration and resource sharing, and they're sort of like your friend at the other end of the phone who can help you with legal issues, with pretty much anything. And we felt like that was the very first step for us in terms of trying to strengthen the landscape, start to build some infrastructure for news organizations in New Jersey. More recently, we have been partnering with Democracy Fund and Knight to do some real experimentation around what sustainability looks like for small local news organizations. So we act as basically a mentor and coach to 6 different sites, exploring various revenue stream opportunities, but also what really genuine community participation looks like. And that, we spend a lot of time thinking about how we can bring the community more into the process of journalism. So we've just started to do a number of pilot programs around just really sort of fun and different creative community engagement ideas, including a partnership with CIR that we're very excited about. So we're trying a lot of different things, but I think our focus, generally speaking, has been on infrastructure and funding the support networks and giving small sites space to experiment and take some risks rather than funding content. We simply don't have money for that.
And Tom.
Great. So I lead a program which is 1/3 of the organization's grant making. The other 2/3 are focused on governance, mostly around Congress, and elections, which covers the conduct of elections, election administration, and questions about money in politics. The work that I do and make grants in, we've called it around informed participation to date and focused on active citizens and a vibrant media. The idea is to support innovations and institutions that help people understand and engage in the democratic process. And those grants have fallen under 3 buckets to date. There's been a bucket around accountability journalism, much of which has ultimately become focused around fact-checking. We've supported Pundit Fact and the American Press Institute, both to do fact-checking and to do research around the effectiveness of political fact-checking of politicians and pundit statements. We've also supported some journalism in that area around money in politics, Center for Public Integrity, because we believe that's an important issue. The second area is around local journalism. We've supported CJR and their great work in the United States project, which covers local journalists, the good and the not so good, and really tries to examine how things are operating at the local level, an area where we think journalism is most endangered. To that end, we've been pleased to support the Institute for Nonprofit News as a vehicle for creating collaboration and strengthening the emerging set of nonprofit outlets, and very pleased to collaborate with many people on the stage around the ONA Challenge Fund for Journalism Education, which, run by ONA, has created collaborations between academics and outlets around research, teaching, and production of journalism. Very pleased to see David Armstrong from Georgia in the audience, the winner of the grand prize in the first cohort for a project that creates a collaboration between a number of universities in Georgia and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. The third bucket is around engagement. That spans not only journalism, but other forms of participation. So there are grants outside of journalism, which I could talk about another time. But we're really interested in the Engaging News Project, which is a research group down at the University of Texas that is doing a lot of partnering with outlets to explore what can be done online to best engage your audience. Some of this has been very focused on little tweaks, changing the like button to a respect button. It doesn't sound like much, but it actually increases time on page and engagement with content in counter-attitudinal ways. So you might not like the comment that someone puts on a page, but you might actually respect it. And when we think about a functioning political system, that's important. So that's a sort of thumbnail sketch of the three areas we're working in at the moment.
Well, so at the MacArthur Foundation, I have to say we have loads of grantees that we're very, very proud of and excited about. I had to pick a couple that we would consider representative, so here they are on the screen. In MacArthur, we support many of the nationally focused nonprofit investigative reporting newsrooms. And one of the trends that we've noticed among those institutions and in the field writ large is that of collaboration. And so the first graphic I have up there is about Rape on the Night Shift, which was an investigation by Frontline Reveal, Center for Investigative Reporting, the investigative reporting program at UC Berkeley, and then also with KQED in San Francisco and Univision. And we fund Frontline Reveal and the IRP. This was an example of a project where you had a report that was distributed and reported in a multi-platform way that was able to reach a series of very different audiences in a bunch of different platforms. And so I have to say that the first image there that I have is right now where the majority of our funding portfolio lies in terms of supporting these journalism institutions. The second graphic there is from the Global Press Institute, which is a small organization based in the Bay Area, but that has more than 20 international bureaus in countries across the world. And their model is to kind of turn the foreign correspondent model on its head by training local women to report on their communities and kind of bring a perspective that someone coming in to report a story might not have. And they also do a great deal of collaboration in terms of getting their stories out on a number of different platforms. They have a syndication model as well. So they're one of the smaller groups we support. Because of the fact that while they're a small institution, the megaphone that they have through collaboration is much bigger. And I will say that I tried to do a little slick graphic design there, but the rock in the background, the kind of rock foundation there is meant to represent the fact that the foundation by and large gives unrestricted general operating multi-year grants, because we feel that that is a solid foundation from which these institutions need in order to build and follow the stories that come up. And so that's kind of a little graphic representation there. Yeah, thanks.
So I followed the instructions, and I had to pick one grantee
And we
out of
appreciate
the,
Thank you,
out of the
Jennifer.
gazillion
The rest of you, I don't know.
grantees in Knight Foundation's portfolio, including Emily Ramshaw's Texas Tribune and many of the other amazing and really important programs and projects that you saw my colleagues also feature. So we have 4 areas of strategic focus at Knight. And yesterday, when Jay McDonald announced an $828,000 grant to the Online News Association, that represents an initiative from our first strategic area of focus. And that's around people, and that's around the talent pipeline, and that's around helping make sure that journalists, technologists, local bloggers, people in communities, in cities, towns, small and big across the country, have an opportunity to share best digital practices, to learn about social media. And the reason why we made the investment with ONA, and specifically in the ONA local program, is because we were able to find success. We were able to build on success of people coming together and creating communities around learning. And we think that's one way, just one way, but a very important way to support local journalism and local reporting. The second area of strategic focus is around innovation. Knight Foundation, as many of you know, many of you who may have participated in our challenges, has had a razor-sharp focus on supporting innovation in journalism in recent years. And Shazna Nessa, who is the director of journalism, and I have continued to, as I said, keep a really sharp focus on supporting innovation. And as an example, here in Los Angeles, we were able to spend some time with Nani de la Peña on what she's been doing in VR, 360-degree video, immersive storytelling with Robert Hernandez, Professor Hernandez at USC. The other evening, and I had an incredible opportunity to see his students pitch their VR projects to Professor Hernandez this semester, and just amazing opportunities that we all have to tell stories in new ways. So we're looking, in addition to supporting innovation in journalism, we're also really interested in supporting digital transformation in legacy newsrooms. And next month, you'll hear about a project where we are planning to support a pretty ambitious effort that will be focused on a handful of major metros across the country to support, to really support with the most unglamorous work involving workflows, technology, roles and responsibilities, just that push from the print production process to the mobile, social, digital production process that we know needs to take place for the original reporting at the local level, which is taking place at the local level, where that needs to be supported. The third area of strategic focus is engaging the audience. And here is the slide that I chose for a recent grant that we made to ProPublica. And we continued our support of ProPublica's amazing news app team, and Scott Klein, rock star, who is here, has led that team. And the really important work that ProPublica has done with the news app team, really making data available to newsrooms, to journalists at the local level, so that their reporting yes, of course, has a national impact, but the News Apps team is providing tools for local news organizations and local journalists to use that data in ways to, again, strengthen journalism at the local level. And part of this most recent grant also supported the really amazing work that Amanda Zamora and the engagement team has been doing at ProPublica. At a time when we have heard so much about audience development, and audience development is vital. We know that it is such an important pathway, the pathway to sustainability, because if you don't have an audience, you really don't have very much to go on. So while there has been, in recent times, so much focus on audience development, we thought it was really important to also highlight the work of journalists who are engaging people in the reporting process. And that's what ProPublica has been doing extremely well. And in fact, there's a meetup later today for other folks who are interested in learning more about how you can engage people in the reporting process. And then finally, the fourth area of strategic focus for us at Knight Foundation is around the First Amendment. And gosh, I feel like I'm just putting out little teasers here and teasers there. And we have a really exciting project in this area, which we will be announcing shortly. So that area also includes, for example, projects that support freedom of information request projects around the country. We have an incredible program at Yale where there's a clinic that supports journalists, not just in Connecticut, but all over the country in terms of battling back when requests for information are denied. And at Knight, one of the exciting opportunities that we offer for people who are interested in funding is the News Challenge process. So I just wanted to make a quick pitch for our Data Challenge project. There are 5 days to apply for the Knight News Challenge on data. Simple question, what might, I can't remember it though. What might, I can't remember it exactly, but how might we use data to improve the lives of individuals and communities? And for all of the journalists in the room here, that's a huge opportunity because at Knight, the mission is very similar to what Jenny described at McCormick, to inform and to engage. So newschallenge.org, check it out, 5 days. We made it 5 days from now because we knew that everyone at ONA needed Monday to and make the deadline by Tuesday.
Before I reference my slide, this is a great segue to kind of what the world of funding can look like. So you talked about ProPublica. So the Ford Foundation also supports ProPublica. But again, the door that we came through to support ProPublica goes to the first point on my slide, which is that we do, I don't want to say primarily, but in substantial ways, support reporting the content on social justice issues. So Jennifer was stressing that the Knight Foundation's current support for ProPublica, what's kind of most interesting, I guess, for the Knight Foundation is the things you were talking about, the social engagement,
Yes.
the data team. Mm-hmm. We love those too, but that's not the front and center for us of a grant to a place like ProPublica. To us, it's the deep, high-quality investigative reporting on issues such as the one that Jennifer showed on her slide, the healthcare system. But across the board, that's pretty much what they do. So that's one prong of what we do at the Ford Foundation. Another one that I call it promoting sustainability, and I have to say this is in a little bit of decline, I think, at the Ford Foundation. I've only been there for 2 years, but before I came in about 2008, 2009, when the bottom dropped out of everything, the economy and the industry, there was more emphasis, and so we still do some of this on helping to, I don't want to sound too dramatic, but save journalism to some extent. And so we still do some work around this. So the example that I picked here, you may be familiar with a relatively new single subject digital site called Chalkbeat. They cover education. They cover one thing, and it's education. And we fund them, but in this case, the grant is not for their reporting per se. They came to us with a proposal for a plan. I forgot if it was over the next 3 years or the next 5 years, but it was to basically grow their capacity. So we do some of those kinds of grants. A big focus for Ford Foundation has been what I called, for the slide purposes here, elevating underrepresented voices. I just happen to hate the word diversity, so I try to give it new names. But so one of the things that one of the grants that we have that I'm really proud of is for Code Switch, which is a desk at NPR that's just been terrific. Another big focus for us, especially because we are a global foundation and I have colleagues around the world who are funding along with me, is strengthening press freedoms and journalist security. And Committee to Protect Journalists is a longtime Ford grantee, and a newer grantee, I think in the portfolio just this year, is Reporters Without Borders. And these are organizations that basically help journalists in peril in different ways: legal peril, physical peril. And finally, another prong of what I do a lot of, but they're not really grants, they're actually grant-like objects, but they're not really grants, is providing, in some cases, very, very small amounts of money for professional opportunities and training. We give people travel money to come to conferences like ONA, to go to conferences like IRE, to go to professional, to go to places where, even if the organization they work for is not going to be the recipient of a grant from Ford, we can still help to put individual journalists in connection with other journalists so they can at least learn from each other. So I have to actually say that I did a lot of that this year, and in a way that I didn't really expect, but I really found. In certain ways, I get the most satisfaction out of the $1,500 that I can give somebody to go to such a thing. Another example is you heard Jane McDonald talk about the Women's Leadership Academy that ONA did at Poynter, and we provided some, I think it was $20,000 in travel support so that to be part of that effort. And those things for me are some of the most satisfying. I think in a way those smaller dollars, and I know they don't sound that small, $20,000 is not that small, but some of those smaller dollars compared to some of our giant grants, maybe it's just that there's something about them that I can actually get my head around. Like I can actually conceive of $1,500 or $20,000. But for me, they are sort of more heartwarming sometimes than the $750,000,
Do you think it's because you're able, in the projects that you described, and we also supported the Women's Leadership Academy, is that you're able to make an immediate impact on a person's life?
Yeah, I think,
on an individual's development.
Well, one of the things we didn't say, and I guess it goes without saying, but the grants that all of us do, I think this is true about all of us, are not to individual people. They are to organizations. And I come out of a TV newsroom, you were a newspaper person for 30 years, I was a TV person for 25 years, and I think some of the reason that I feel this way is when you come out of storytelling in TV, it's, one of the rules of the road is to always find a person through whom a bigger story is told. So I think for me, I still have the journalist's instinct that if I am funding a person who I can actually conceive of as opposed to an organization, somehow it has more, I don't know, I can just feel it better.
All right, well, Megan and I have a bunch of burning questions down at this end, so hold on to your hats because we have a lot of ground we're going to cover here in a pretty short window of time. The first question I guess I have is, we love you all, but you really confuse us. You know, when Megan and I are both applying for a grant, we both have a great idea. There's one at CIR, there's one at the Texas Tribune. How, when you were looking at these competing applications, do you decide who you're going to fund in any given year? And how much of it comes down to a potential, you know, policy directive that you have at your foundation or a goal of somebody at the top of your organization? How are you making those tough decisions when you have a couple of great projects coming to you? And be specific if you can.
You know, one thing that Barbara discussed that I think would be enormously helpful to the audience is the concept of doors. You know, there's like a different door for funding at different foundations, and understanding what the entry point is often the most effective way to achieve the goal, because you understand what that foundation's goal is.
And so what are some of those entry points for you all? You know, I mean, how do we as journalists or as, you know, the people responsible for funding in our organizations, how do we figure out what door to go in?
Well, let me just take a stab at this. One of the things that I often say, because it's true, but I don't know that this helps you understand it better, but maybe it just explains the confusion. I think applying to funders, especially big funders like most of us are, is kind of like applying to a very selective college. And by that I mean, there are way more highly qualified applicants for the slots that exist at, you know, fill in the blank with whatever name of whatever college you want. But to some extent, right, the people in the admissions office there are certain things they need. They need some football players, and they need some clarinet players, and you know, there are certain things that they're trying to do when they put together a class. But even there, they have more potential football players and more potential clarinet players than they can accept. And so there is no, you know, it's not like we know the secret and we're just not telling you, even though I know that it feels that way a lot to people who are seeking grants. And I would just say it's, you know, obviously your proposal or your, you know, what you're coming to talk about needs to fit in a general sense into the things that we just told you are the strategic priorities. But let's face it, most of those strategic priorities are big enough to drive a truck through, and they're not always that much of a guideline, right? When I tell you we're a social justice foundation, a lot of you can frame your work in those terms if you need to, but if you're gonna see Jennifer, innovation may be the door that you wanna come through,
Yes,
and it's for the
yes.
same project. So I would just say that there isn't, at least for me, there is not a clear way to answer the question that I think Emily just, I can't see all the way down there, I think that was Emily's question asked, but if you can keep in your mind the analogy that it really is like being a highly qualified applicant to a highly selective college, I hope that helps make some sense out of why some of you may have applied for grants or even tried to apply for grants and been turned away before you even get through the door, and you have no idea why, because it seems as if this is exactly what you said you're looking to support.
Tom, you want to jump in here? Yeah.
I'll add again. I mean, I can't echo that more. There are, if you get in the door, it means you have a good idea. We have far more good ideas presented to us than we can possibly fund. And that's, with that starting point, the best way I find is a frank and open conversation. No one is ever the perfect grantee. And if you're a good program officer, you're going to somehow find where the weaknesses are, and you're going to make a judgment. The faster you can get to a discussion about the reality of what this project is, the better it's going to be. There's also you obviously want to frame your project in a way that fits the foundation priorities, but if it's a forward focus and they're looking, and the grantor is looking for a Camry, don't try and sell us the forward focus. Don't try and make it look like a Toyota Camry. That will help us give you straightforward feedback and work with you if we think there's a possibility, and if there isn't, say, not today. I know that we all struggle with saying no to, the hardest no is the no to the perfect project that just doesn't fit today. And I'll just sort of add that certainly in my, and I'm sure my colleagues' interactions, let's just say we can make grants to 5% of the people we talk to. I'd like to phrase it as, and I try to be useful to 100%. It might not be money, but if there's something we can do to help you, we will, don't doubt that we'll all do it.
I would add to that that the point you made about timing, I think, is really important, because sometimes people come to you with ideas, and the ideas are good ideas, but it's just not quite the right time. So, for example, I think we're starting to be a lot more interested in data, and we're not quite there. So don't come to me with your ideas about data yet.
No, they can just go to the News Challenge next
Yeah,
5
go to the
minutes.
News Challenge.
Newschallenge.org.
That's exactly right. Don't come to us. But sometimes you just have to. It's hard. It's hard to explain that to people. It's like, just let it ride for a little while. Let me work on it a little bit, because a lot of our work too is just sort of an evolution of our thinking, and certain things align at the right time, and you take advantage of it when you can. So, I would say we have a very specific process, which I'm sure everybody here does too. We have, if you're a new applicant, you come through a very formal letter of inquiry process. But I also find that a lot of my work is really sort of seeking out good ideas rather than waiting for them to come to me. And so I spend a lot of time studying what's happening, not just in New Jersey, but beyond New Jersey, and seeing what ideas we can adapt for New Jersey. And I would say that even though we focus on New Jersey, we don't require grantees to be based in New Jersey. If you're out there like a CIR and you want to come to New Jersey and test out some ideas, then I'm all ears.
Well, that kind of, and I would love to hear from Jennifer McCormick and from Lauren, but the idea of deliverables, when you make a grant and it's for something specific, isn't there always some kind of string attached? Is it something that you're looking for in terms of a change or an impact? And maybe Jennifer from McCormick, you could kind of tackle that of what actually are you expecting from these grants?
Well, I think, and to kind of dovetail what all of my colleagues have been talking about, I think foundations could be really transparent about the big picture and what we're looking for. I actually share kind of the broad structure of our logic model, theory of change, and to kind of see so that I can communicate to prospects and also our current grantees to say, look, this is kind of the big picture that we're looking at. Where do you see your work fitting in? And if you have traction and you're really good at what you're doing, we probably have heard about it. And if you've never had a relationship with us, it's like dating. We just want to get to know you. We want to know that we can advocate for you and that you're not going to leave us in the lurch. So be really good at what you're doing, figure out where you fit in the big picture, and I think that's an easy way to kind of really simplify the evaluation process.
Lauren, is that the same for you? Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that Molly and Tom and I were talking earlier this morning about deliverables and how a lot of times news organizations that apply for these grants are spending a lot of their time making sure that they can meet the terms of them, at the year mark, filling out applications. How is that process? I'm curious for all of you, Lauren, maybe you do have feedback on this. How is that changing, or what do you expect of the news organizations that are producing?
Sure. Yeah, that goes to the previous question as well in terms of what we generally fund. MacArthur funds, we really fund, like Tom, with kind of a US audience in mind. And a lot of the work the work done by the organizations we support is nationally focused. We don't generally fund local news, except a few exceptions in Chicago, which is our home city. And we don't fund journalism training by and large either. We do, as I mentioned earlier, provide general operating support to a number of institutions, and because we are in the privileged position of providing multi-year grants, that also comes with a big kind of a heavy lift to make the case that this is an institution that we would like to support in the long run. And often we'll start with a shorter relationship if we're bringing in a new organization to fund. It won't be as long as one that we've worked with for a number of years. But some of the criteria that we do look for is this news or journalism organization very intentional about their audience, who they want to reach? Are they open to collaborations? Do they have that level of creativity to stand out and do their work in what is a very, very crowded and complicated and very, very loud journalism ecosystem? So those are some of the things we look for. We look for strong leadership. And we look for, we kind of do look at where we can play a role in strengthening institutions that do then have the creativity and the freedom to pursue underreported stories, for lack of a better term. And in terms of the deliverables, we do ask folks to report out every year. And we welcome updates as well in the interim, but we pretty much don't get involved beyond those things. We're not asking for quarterly updates or anything like that. It's kind of a yearly check-in in terms of a grant that's ongoing, because they are mostly multi-year.
Those of us who are desperate for your funds have something that we call shiny new object syndrome. And that is, we apply for a grant one year and we might get it, but then when we apply for an update grant the following year or the year after that, the funding has moved on to the next, quote unquote, shiny new object. How do you advise news organizations that are looking for sort of sustaining funding or longer term projects? How do you advise them to come back with a round 2 or a round 3 pitch and make it sexy and fresh again?
I would actually, could I ask I want to turn that question around, which is, do you find that that's true throughout the foundation world? Because I think we would have different experiences as funders with that.
I think there are experiences in which you go to a funder and you get a 3-year grant for something, and that counts to me as sort of sustaining its longer term. You know that funding is secure for 3 years, and you can really invest in something knowing that you're going to have the money. But there are sort of smaller scale grants for individual projects where you might get the seed funding for something, and the rest of the funding is contingent on meeting particular benchmarks. I'm just curious, from your end, what the advice is to news organizations on keeping it fresh. Or on coming back year over year with different ideas or different projects?
Well, one of the things I would say is it's possible, I'm not sure, okay. I don't know if I have advice on how to keep it fresh. I would say the advice that I give, and the Ford Foundation is currently undergoing a sort of periodic reevaluation and resetting of its strategies and priorities. So I've made a lot of phone calls this year in which what I have basically said is not, here's how you come back and make it fresh, because I don't know enough yet to tell you what we're exactly going to be doing. But I do think that grant recipients need to be prudent. I think there's a little bit too much, if I can just say this, I think presumptive renewal is not a good thing. I don't think I understand that when you receive a grant, a 1-year grant, oh my gosh, it's almost over before it started. A 2-year grant's not that long either, and neither really is a 3-year grant. You want to keep a project going. And so as a result, I think what happens is that there is a little bit too much presumptive renewal going on, which is that the organizations often don't plan for the possibility that there is not going to be a renewal of that grant. And I think one of the things that we all hope and presume is that if we are doing a grant for an organization for a particular project or just for general operating support, that by virtue, success breeds success. So a lot of people have said to me since I came to the Ford Foundation, your grant was so helpful in getting us in the doors of other funders. Right, so that's one of the things that we know happens when any one of us gives a grant to an organization that's seeking one. And that alone is, so sometimes our grants are not renewed, but they are the thing that sparks other support. But I guess the advice that I would give, and I have made a lot of phone calls this year giving this advice, is as you do your planning, have a plan that does include renewal of your grant. but have a plan that doesn't include renewal of your grant, because for all kinds of reasons that are not entirely in my control, it's possible that there would not be a renewal of the grant. And by the way, and this part I know is confusing too to people, by the way, that may not be any reflection on the work, and there still may not be a grant renewal for various reasons. Between 2014 and 2015, my grant-making budget for internal reasons was reduced by 25%. So the first year I was there, I had a $10 million budget, and this year I had a $7.5 million budget. That's $2.5 million that aren't going somewhere. So something happened in the way that I either did renewals or new grants or whatever, and I did different things. But the point is, there are things that happen where they're not always in your program officer's control, and you just need to plan prudently the same way, I would say, the same way you would do like your household finances. So that's not really the question you asked, how do I come back and make sure that we get another grant? I'm really saying part of what you need to think about is, well, what if we didn't?
Yeah. Now, Tom, do you want to?
I was going to add, there's something that's very important to us around learning. And when you come back for a renewal and you say to us, okay, this went well, or this didn't, we learned this, and we're doing that, we're planning to do that. That is much more powerful than, you gave us that much last time, we're looking for the same amount this time. We want to move things forward. We know you do too. And the more you can demonstrate that to us, and honestly, we all know, as I said, there's no perfect grantee, there's no riskless investment out there. I mentioned the University of Georgia O&A Challenge Fund winner. I'll reveal now that you were, David, you were actually on the bottom of the list. We thought when we made that grant to you that you were quite possible you would fail because of the level of collaboration that success required. Turned out, it went well. But it was being able to understand the level of risk, being able to say, okay, we're going to take that risk, is key to all of this. So.
I want to underscore the honesty part. I think that goes hand in hand with learning, because there's nothing worse than talking to a grantee and just knowing that everything they're saying is just being sugar-coated. It's like, we're partners, we want to help you, so we can't help you if we don't understand what the challenges are. So if you're sugar-coating everything, it's just not helpful. And so I really appreciate just being direct. I'm not going to punish you for being honest with me. I really appreciate it and value it.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, as a former reporter, I have found myself apologizing as I would begin telephone conversations with grantees for being a reporter and for asking questions. And I would say that one of the things that I've learned is the value and importance of a relationship, and the value and importance of trust and being open, just as Molly said, about what's working and what's not working. And it's so much better to hear it from the grantee, which is a word, by the way, I don't like. I don't like that word, grantee. It's so much better to hear it from you than to hear it from, in the hallway at O&A. Like, not having any surprises, I've learned, is really good. Just, going back, Emily, to Megan, to another question that you had asked around evaluation and measurement. Knight has $5 million in the field to not-for-profit news organizations across the country. And we're halfway through that investment. And this year, and Alberto Ibargüen, the president and CEO of Knight Foundation, asked me to, you're a reporter, get on the phone. Like, talk to folks, you and Chasnut and Marie, and we did. And we learned so much from those conversations, outside of the traditional reporting process. And one thing that I learned was we were asking for a lot of data that wasn't helping these not-for-profit organizations move forward. So, meaning, I would, get a report on how many Twitter followers they had or how many Facebook likes they have. But there was no context about whether those two pieces of information were really important to drive and support that news organization moving forward. So from that experience, we're now working with the USC's Dana Chin with 3 not-for-profits to figure out what are the metrics that foundations should be asking to help determine success. And they have to be the metrics that are not just what foundations need or want, but metrics that, again, support the news organization's success. So just one of the things that I've learned is just the importance of picking up the phone. Or earlier this week, I was with Scott Lewis and Mary in San Diego, at the Voice of San Diego, and just being in this small but robust newsroom in San Diego just offered me just a wonderful window on the terrific work taking place there.
I'm just going to give a quick notice. In a few minutes, we're going to open up for questions. So if you haven't thought about the question you want to ask this panel, which you'll never get another chance to have them all on one stage to ask them a question, please think now. The mic is right there in the center of the room. So if you want to ask a question, please go up. We're going to keep going with a few more, but then we're going to turn to you guys, which I hope you'll be able to ask them. But one thing I wanted to expound on, maybe Lauren, you can jump in here, is we're both from nonprofit organizations, so we come to you guys with a certain ask. But have you or would you ever fund for-profit organizations? There's certainly needs there and different than nonprofits, but what's your kind of view of the work that those organizations are doing, and what would you want from them to compete?
You know, go ahead.
No, please.
Well, I was just going to say that at MacArthur, by and large, we do not fund for-profit newsrooms. We do think of ourselves as playing a role in subsidizing for-profit newsrooms by funding a ProPublica, a CIR, Center for Public Integrity, folks whose stories then do appear in these for-profit outlets that have large audiences. So we know we're playing a role in helping to strengthen that ecosystem, but we're not really built to fund for-profit journalism newsrooms.
I just want to give you a very recent example of how Knight Foundation did support a for-profit newsroom, and that's The Guardian here in the US, where we made a significant investment for The Guardian to develop a mobile newsroom. So why would Knight Foundation invest in a for-profit newsroom? The Guardian has demonstrated, as many of you here would agree, incredible capability and capacity for innovation and for change. And this is where journalism, news information, is being distributed and consumed. And we made that investment because we see this mobile lab at The Guardian as a learning platform for the entire field. So we are able to invest in for-profit newsrooms, again, with the understanding that everything is open source, that the learnings will be shared with the field, and that the new forms of storytelling that will result from this project will benefit everyone in the industry.
Molly, you were nodding your head there, yeah.
So I alluded to earlier that we actually work with 6 sites in New Jersey, and they're all for-profit. And we actually do this with help from the Knight Foundation, but it's been a really interesting experience for us. We frankly want to, we believe that journalism can be a business and should be a business, and we don't want 100 new nonprofit journalism sites in New Jersey. We want journalism to be a thriving business. So we are specifically supporting for-profits to help understand what that sustainability looks like. And I would say too that there's sort of a knee-jerk reaction around supporting for-profits, but these sites that we're supporting, they might as well be nonprofit. I mean, they in spirit, in essence, they are exactly like nonprofits. So.
Yeah, could I just jump in just on the not-for-profit thing?
Then we're going to
because
go
that's
to
been,
user questions.
Yes, and then, I love this, line is
there-
forming. And again, part of this came out of our conversations with not-for-profit news organizations around the country, is just because you're a not-for-profit doesn't mean that you are, as Molly said, not responsible for generating revenue. And to what Barbara said earlier about an assumption of renewals, you know, the assumption, success to me is when no renewal is required because a project has been, let's say, supported then at the local level or by local funders, or when a project has provided a path to sustainability, and then there's revenues to support it. So to me, the very best sign of success is when there is no request for a renewal.
Since we have a lot of people lined up already, let's get one or two quick responses to each question so we can make sure to cycle through a whole bunch of folks. Go ahead, sir.
Oh.
And introduce yourself, please.
Yeah.
Sure, I'm Bruce Kuhn with KQD in San Francisco. And again, thank you for putting this panel together. This is really the platinum of Journalism Foundation support. I wanted to ask two questions on a more broad level, and it actually relates to that last bit of conversation about nonprofit and for-profit. The context is at one time how journalism was going to survive with the business models being destroyed and changed. There was a lot of talk about the nonprofit world as being a model, and you have successes like Texas Tribune and CAR, but the fact of the matter is there doesn't really seem to be a lot of support for that in the philanthropy and foundation world outside of the panel here. I wonder if you could comment on is that accurate, because most foundations and philanthropy usually has a much more focused area of interest, as you pointed out, not about general journalism or general news. It can be about the environment, it can be about science, and it can be about health. And so there's really not a lot of support in this general foundation world. And then the second part of the question is, to your point about deliverables, they seem to be getting more exacting, actually, in the foundation world, where they want to have impact. And again, traditionally, journalism is a more involved citizenry, but how do you measure these kind of things? And again, we're finding that the philanthropy and foundation world says, no, you got to show us results, you got to have measurements, and there's a lot of new demands. So I wonder if you could comment on those two observations.
Well, they're kind of connected. I mean, I would say you're absolutely right that there's not nearly enough money out there to support all of the journalism that is very worthy of foundation support. And as a result, I think that is one of the reasons that foundations that do make investments in journalism really want to know that the relatively meager number of dollars that's out there, even if you combined all our budgets, it's really not that much compared to the need, that those are wise investments. Now, I also, though, share the perspective that, especially when it comes to something like journalism or documentary film or the arts, how do you prove impact? It's not the same thing as giving malaria vaccines and showing what a big difference it made in incidences of disease, right? You can't really do that. And this is and we could do a whole other panel, and we could do a whole weekend on impact. How do you prove it? How do you show it? Et cetera. But I think the reason that you see foundations pressing for that kind of information is because every dollar granted is really a precious dollar, and we're trying to at least get some sense that it was a wise decision.
Hi, I'm Kevin Davis of KLJD Consulting now. So one of the questions I've always wanted to ask, but didn't in my prior job, is let's talk about the brush that's painted when nonprofits take money from foundations that are perceived to be on one side of the political spectrum or the other, or have a certain agenda as it relates to the content. It is by far, I think, the one thing that we're getting hit with more and more, and we don't really have a very good answer for. So again, if we're taking money from a handful of foundations, and that money came originally from people at Enron, or that money came from people at eBay, or from the oil business, somehow we're perceived to be agents of them. What are the mitigating factors from a foundation standpoint do you think that these nonprofits should be doing to be able to distance themselves from that perception?
Well, I can tell you a little bit about my experience being on the other side of a media organization where we work with a foundation that had interests on a particular area and didn't necessarily have any experience working in journalism funding. It was terrible on both sides. The content, I think, suffered. Our credibility as a media organization suffered. And quite frankly, I thought the foundation, did not have a very great time in that partnership. So I think it behooves both institutions, the funder and the fundee, to be very clear about your expectations and the parameters in which, even if you are the grant seeker, you always have agency to say no if the partnership isn't working. And I think that kind of dynamic is a healthy dynamic to really produce really great work.
I wanted to ask on that, do any of you who fund journalism, have any of you ever asked to review content before publication?
Oh my God.
No.
No.
Right.
No, let's just get, no, and if it was offered, it would give a huge pause. I can't imagine anyone on this stage would even consider that. To Kevin's question, I think it's important, there's a question here of transparency to mitigate this, so that there is transparent, the grantor and the grantee are transparent about the funding and what it is for. I think there is a set of ethics around what any non-profit newsroom is prepared to accept as a set of deliverables. And I think being transparent about that will help. And I think fundamentally diverse sources of revenue so that no one organization can be seen to be in any way controlling the content in any way is another way out of this as a problem. But I think it is a genuine concern of grantees and of grantors that no one wants to destroy the credibility in any way. And I think we have to, when grantors have funds, grantees will want them, and we need to make sure that the ethics on both sides are absolutely solid. So.
But also, I think, Kevin, I don't know where you went, but I think it's important to, let me back up. In my last year at NBC News, I worked on a project that was funded, in this case, by the Ford Foundation. It's actually how my relationship with them started. So that also answers the previous question. Yes, the Ford Foundation does fund some for-profit organizations, but it was the news organization that put a very explicit clause, I guess, in the grant contract that said that no editorial person in the news, on the news side, and in this case that was me, the senior producer of the project, was even allowed to talk to anybody from the foundation. So the news organization built in the Berlin Wall. And I think that news organizations, if they have any question about this whole issue, should build in that wall. And if a foundation will not let you do that, I know it's hard, but I would walk away from the grant.
Absolutely.
I would walk away from the grant because you have much more to risk than the foundation does.
Is that Tracy?
Oh, thank you. Tracy Powell, I'm with All Digitocracy, and I want to say that a number of you have impacted my life and my work in a very positive way, and I'm definitely thankful for that. My question for you is, there are a growing number of independent journalists, publishers, who are flying under the radar, and they are amassing these very specialized communities and audiences. And I want to know, how do we get your attention? I understand Jennifer's point about picking up the phone, but let's face it, you guys are hard to get a hold of. So can you offer tips and strategies to get your attention? Thanks.
I said that's a hard one, but I think that our website, certainly, we've now gone through a kind of a transition where folks can write a letter of inquiry that we will then see immediately in our new kind of web-based grants management system. And so we will see people coming through the front door just with requests. I do think it's really important to have an answer to the question of what role is your organization playing in the news ecosystem? What do you bring to the table? And really articulating that. Also, scouring the websites of us and my colleagues up here on the panel, because there will be some guidance there that will give you a sense of, this is the right time to approach, or maybe not, or my organization might fit, or maybe not. So just really, having a very, doing all of the research as possible. But even, I do understand it's a difficult situation.
But to Tracy's point, and I think it's an excellent question, and I was very lucky to attend a gathering of independent journalists earlier this year, and Tracy was there, and many wonderful people were there who are producing really important journalism, but they're not affiliated with traditional news organizations or with traditional not-for-profit news sites. And it's a challenge, and it's a challenge that we have to take on, to not only wait for people to apply to us, but to go out there and seek and find those journalists, those organizations that are serving people who are underserved right now. I was just going to say something, but I think it might get me in trouble, so I'm not going to say it.
Now you have
We'll
to
come
say
back
it.
to that later.
But it's about, and that is all right, should I just say what I'm going to say that could get me in trouble?
Yeah, come on.
Since I just,
No one's here on Twitter anymore.
That's not what's
On
going
Twitter.
So I'll just say it. So,
between
for
us.
example, many of us, all of us, make significant investments in public media, which is really important because of the quality of the journalism and of that's being produced by public media. But honestly, sometimes I think when we're making investments in awesome public radio and awesome, like Frontline and PBS NewsHour, that we're making investments in news organizations for the overly informed. And one of our challenges, I think, is to find out how we can make investments for people who are not, who don't have access to news sources, who aren't informed. And that means that we have to learn more about how people are consuming news and information. We have to do a much better job. Is it television? I'm trying to learn a lot now about television, as Barbara can tell you. I'm always asking her questions about, so I just think that that's a challenge that we need to take on as funders, is how do we serve people who are not being served? And that's one reason why Tom and I and others here have been, and Molly, have been trying to grapple with that question.
Yeah, and
Okay, now I'm going to get myself in trouble. But I'm going to call. But about
This is getting good. Everybody get their
But
Molly,
I
you're
want to. No, Jennifer, I want to call you out on this a little bit. But in doing that, I'm going to get myself in trouble. Tracy's question is a question that I think it's a completely legitimate question. And the part of the truth of the matter, here's the part where I get myself in trouble, is that we are all, to a great extent, a part of the establishment. And I really think what Tracy may be asking, and Tracy, tell me if I'm wrong, and I know Tracy, so, I think part of your question is about how do you get the attention of establishment funders when, for whatever reason, you are not perceived to be part of the establishment. So, well,
But Tracy, you are part of the establishment.
no, but I think and I think the gathering you're talking about that you went to was one that I went to as well, and there were a lot of very small publishers doing excellent work.
Excellent work.
But honestly, I'll just admit, hadn't heard of most of them until we went to that gathering, and so I think I'm not saying that this is a good fact or a bad fact. I just think that the current reality is that the foundations that you happen to have represented up here, which is not all the foundations in the universe, but the ones that you have up here that fund journalism, are part of the establishment, which is not to say, therefore, we do not do anything else and we would never open our minds to something that isn't. But it's a steep hill to climb. And I don't really have a great answer for you, but I think that I just want to acknowledge that that's really what I think you're asking, and that I think we have to own that that is part of the formula. I do. I think we have to own that. It doesn't make us bad people. Maybe it does, but I don't think it does. But, and it doesn't make our organizations bad organizations. But I do think we have to own that.
And I would just say that that also presents a challenge for us to do the reporting, to learn more about parts of the country that we may be able to serve, people who are not being served now through our current funding.
Yeah.
Let's keep going to the question. Oh, let's go to the next question, but jump in, Tom. Yeah, we want to keep it going.
Well, I just think that it's very timely what Jennifer and Barbara said. I have about 22 years in journalism, mostly in Spanish, small media. I'm not famous, but I was listening to Jennifer that she said when the workshop started that we need new ways to tell the stories. Well, for 4 years, I follow all the crimes, the killings of journalists, and the annihilation of free speech in Mexico. I wrote a play, it's 110 pages, and it's based in all what's been happening. And I think we are the mighty neighbor that we turn the head the other way. We are so close, and I think our colleagues, my colleagues, I'm from Mexico City, I started working there, I studied there, and I have many friends. Sometimes I think that if I would stay there, could have been killed. And well, I would love to listen your advice, your orientation. How can I start raising some funding, some money to put it on the stage and tour it, do some readings and universities for students with a panel with one of the journalists that is exiled here, whose whole family was killed. Thank you.
Where should she begin?
You should come talk to us, actually. I would love to know about that. So, yes. But for funding, Tom, maybe
I was just going to respond that I think those sort of stories tug at the heartstrings of all of us on this stage, and we should just meet up afterwards.
Okay, I'm Darko Ivanovic. I'm actually from Europe, Montenegro. I'm a Fulbright Humphrey Fellow at Cronkite School, Arizona State University. And I represent actually a group of students that came to America, explore America. We're professionals, but given a year to learn here. And this is a land of opportunity, and we have this, I brought the idea of wearable technology that could be used at universities. And we are thinking about creating a startup, a for-profit startup, but to eliminate all the students will get it for free. So are we eligible to go to your funds and provide students with this? It's an exciting and great idea. You will hear about it in months to come, maybe years to come. And we will provide it free to all the students in America.
So one approach that we have at Knight Foundation is, in addition to our grant-making process, we also have an enterprise fund which is made up of startups, of for-profit commercial startups. And new startups, such as you described, are considered for that fund. But that's outside of the grant-making process.
Okay, thank you.
Just wanted to weigh in. When you have an idea and you feel like you're alone and you can't seem to get enough leverage to gain the attention of a funder, I think start local. You know, I've always believed that every community foundation should be funding journalism, local journalism in some capacity, and I know Knight Foundation has done really great work, and Dodge has done really exemplary work in that area. But when you start local, you're affecting the communities that you actually touch. And so once you find the funders in that space, they know your story and they can contextualize your impact a lot better than somebody from across the country.
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Hi, my name is Trevor Snapp. I work for Neighbor Reports. We're a local news organization based in Sudan's conflict zones. We help train journalists and get their material into partnerships with people like PBS, and we also push the material back into Sudan. And we've been working grant funded for about 3 years now. And you know, we've seen, and this is a question for the international funders, donors, we've seen lots of changes in different kind of focuses, and I know over time that's been a lot of changes. There was a big period where investigative reporting was the thing everyone invested abroad. Now, obviously, all the deaths of journalists is kind of a priority. Things are changing, so I'm curious. I know, Barbara, you said you guys are in discussions about where you're going, but also just among other funders in the community, what are some general trends you see that are important priority areas that may be different than the past moving ahead for international funding of journalism programs around the world?
In terms of international funding, our focus is on the US, so I can't really answer that question.
I can speak a little bit for Ford Foundation. My own personal portfolio is US focused, but so for example, to the extent that the Ford Foundation funds journalism and press access and things like that globally, we don't like the model of having, you know, somebody based in New York funding on the ground someplace where we may have a field office. So one thing, that's one important thing is if you're working in an area where the Ford Foundation works, we don't work everywhere, but if you're working in an area where we work, and you can go on the website and see the map where we work, it would be to speak to whoever are the program staff there. So that's like the first piece of advice I would give. And then in terms of trends and how that, this is some of what I'm not sure about going forward for us, but I would just say to see whether there are funders on the ground where you're doing the work and not just US funders.
Yeah, we do. Most of our funding comes from kind of on the ground offices, but I'm just curious if there's anything that you've watched kind of this landscape over time, if there's anything
I think as you point out, journalist safety right now is very much on the minds of a lot of people who worry about our profession. And I think, at least for us, journalist safety is something that I think that we've done more funding of in the last year and a half, and I guess depending upon sort of what's going on in the world, we may do more of it. And digital security as well, actually, which is a global issue.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm an arts reporter for a print organization, a for-profit organization, and over the years, as we've looked at what coverage gets read online and mobile, we've shrunken our arts coverage, I think from 10 people to about I'm the only guy now. Arts organizations are struggling to get attention. As a result, a philanthropic organization funding arts, not journalism, arts, would like to partner with us. And it could be anything from funding, like subsidizing Critic, or helping us develop an arts app, or hiring interns. I'm just wondering, I work for a for-profit corporation, and I feel like I'm pitching like a nonprofit idea. Is this new territory? Is this something that's been done before? Like, I don't know if you guys fund the New York Times Arts Critic or something like that. Are there red flags? Is this a new opportunity? Like, what are your tips, or how does this sound like?
So, as representatives of private foundations, when we make a grant, it has to have a charitable purpose. When we are making a grant to a 501c3, that's sort of accepted. No issues, no lawyers needed. if we ever make a grant to a for-profit entity, it requires lawyers, it requires some extra examination and some extra reporting. So for some foundations, this is something they just say we don't do. That's not true with us. I don't think it's true with some other foundations on the panel. So I think the key here for you would be to just familiarize yourself a little bit with how that works and go to foundations who are prepared to do what's known as an ER grant in the terminology. And there are larger foundations that are normally equipped to do that when they need to.
I'll say that, I said earlier, by and large, we don't fund for-profit entities, but as Tom said, there is a set of criteria where we can make exceptions. This happens in our documentary film fund, because mostly we're funding small for-profit companies for a nonprofit project, so it has to be a charitable purpose. You have to state that no individual or entity will make a profit from the grant, and that it will be made widely available to the public on a free or low-cost basis. So those are the general legal things you have to do, but in general for your project, I'd say approach arts funders, because this seems like something that would hew a little closer to some of their goals than maybe some of the traditional journalism funders. And I don't know, did you say if it was local or a national focus organization?
Local.
So then again, I'd say what Jenny said as well in terms of approaching the local funders that you have there, local foundations.
Yeah, we're only, yeah.
Are you responding directly to that?
Oh,
Yep.
yeah. Did everyone hear that? Mediafunders.org. That's very helpful.
We have to wrap up right at 3, so we have time probably for one
more
quick
question.
one. Yep.
Hi, my name is Carolina from Radio Ambulante. We are a Spanish language podcast based in New York, and we tell stories about Latinos and Latin Americans. So my question is this: we are a small project, but we have grown in the 3 years that we have existed. And at the beginning, as every small project, we created partnerships, and we were working together with grantees of you. Like I know established organizations give award grants to these organizations, and they re-grant to projects like us. So then we are like bigger now, and we think that we can apply to some of your directly. So one question is, when is it appropriate to jump the intermediary organization and go directly to you? When you consider that you're like big enough, or you accomplished the requirements that you have. And the second is just out of curiosity, do you as funders always go directly to when you have you give a grant to an organization and they work with smaller organizations, do you always learn from those smaller organizations about the experience with those funders, or you just learn from the report? Do you understand?
We need the quick 60-second answer to this one.
Yeah.
Yep.
We read the reports, all of our reports, but we also do a lot of calls and informational kind of research, just because we think it's good to get all perspectives of the story. But what you're doing is fantastic. I think smaller organizations, and including for-profit organizations, could be savvy in being sub-grantees or contract out with other organizations that can get the larger grants.
I think the question about size and when to approach it can be a tricky one. So I think that you'll want to make sure that organizationally you're in the best position back office-wise to manage a grant, to kind of be able to do the reporting that's required of foundations. And that, there is enough of a structure there in terms of your staff that it is something that, otherwise you might be better off going through some of your larger partners in terms of approaching, especially larger foundations.
Great. Well, let's thank our panelists, and hopefully they'll be available. We have to clear the stage after this.